Almost one-third of mortality in India is because of infectious diseases. HIV, tuberculosis, malaria and other diseases spread by vectors like mosquitoes. We are at Faridabad in the Institute of Translational Health Sciences and Technology Institute. Are we to take these infectious diseases as fate or can we fight? That's what this institute is trying to address. And we are with us as the guest today, the director of this institute.
Dr. Sudhanshu Vrathi has given a new dimension to the field of translational biology. Trained as a virologist at the Australian National University, he is presently the Dean of Translational Health Sciences and Technology Institute. Dr. Vrathi hails from a small town in Uttar Pradesh. Passionate about science and microorganisms, he did his MSc in microbiology, biochemical engineering from IIT Delhi and PhD in biochemistry from the Australian National University. His present research interest lies in the area of RNA virus replication and vaccine development. Dr. Vrathi was actively involved in the clinical development of an oral rotavirus vaccine. He has received various awards for his outstanding work.
So, welcome sir, joining for this Eureka show, Dr. Sudhanshu Vrathi, director of this institute. We are very thankful for you being here. It's a very interesting institute. We'll come to talk about this institute, but what I would like to ask you is, what kind of background that you had, as a child, before you became the director of this institute? What kind of area you come up from? What was your, schooling?
I come from a small town in western UP in district of Bulandshahr. This town's population when I was growing up was about 20,000. There was
20,000.
Yeah,
very small.
Very small town, and there was one science college where we could go for education.
Basically, no choice. There was only
There was
one
no
college.
choice. Only one science college, and I remember growing up there. Going to school, of course, on foot on those days. It was about a kilometer and a half, maybe 2 kilometers away from where I used to live. There was very little of electricity, and especially so it wasn't there during the nights when you needed it most. So I distinctly remember using kerosene lamp. And
when you were studying your school and undergraduate studies, basically kerosene lamp was what was your illumination after the sundown.
Absolutely. And struggling with all the insects that were attracted to the the lamp.
Okay.
So that is how I grew up.
How did you get passionate about science? Did you just stumble, or was it some passion that developed? Who inspired you in that youth?
I would give this credit to my father.
Father?
Yes.
Was he a teacher or academics?
No, he was neither in academics nor a professional teacher, but he was a great teacher to us. I think every day he would spend at least 1 hour besides the school that we were going to, teaching some of the subjects like maths and science, and more so science. He kind of inspired us. I remember making small electrical devices, for example, magnet, by winding around a metal piece using this copper wire,
okay.
Yeah, and a small battery. And then I think the first device that I would have made with his help, of course, was a telegraph.
Telegraph?
Yeah, small telegraph machine using some clamps and this magnet that we could make using the battery, and that way we could communicate
So you were communicating with your mother, sitting in your room, sending a message to your mother, I am hungry.
We no, no, not exactly like this, but you know, being able to move another telegraph equipment away from you, sitting in one place, that was exciting enough.
I'm curious about your father. You say he is not a teacher or academic. What was he?
He was a businessman.
Businessman, but still passionate about science and also could pass on that spark to you.
Yes, and actually he used to run a printing press business.
Printing press.
And I remember, you know, we were doing a lot of business of printing books for a homeopathic pharmacy.
Okay.
And so obviously, I think he got a lot of interest in homeopathy after that. So he's become a dedicated homeopath, which he runs free clinic for a lot of people even today. But I also remember proofreading some of the books.
So basically, as a young kid, the material which comes to your press for printing will come to you for proofreading,
That's right.
and that is, used to be your, reading.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I got some understanding of medical complications at least, that because in homeopathy they talk about medical complication, and then they will talk about some medicine, homeopathic medicine, what would that medicine do. So I got at least some exposure to medical complications that one has to face in day-to-day life.
Can you remember anything about your school, undergraduate days, or your master's days? Which
I think I was always interested in science. I would have perhaps become a doctor or a medical researcher, but I became firm that I wanted to become a medical researcher when pursuing my postgraduate degree.
what were you doing postgraduate degree?
So I got an opportunity to do postgraduate degree in microbiology.
In microbiology.
And in 1980s or late 1970s, when I got this opportunity, there were very few.
I mean, that would have been a very new subject. I mean, a
there
kind
was-
of a.
I don't remember there was any other place which was giving a degree in microbiology. There were degrees in biochemistry. Biotechnology came much later. But GB Pant University in Pantnagar, they had a microbiology program, and I was very keen to work on bacteria, because during my undergraduate courses, when I read about bacteria, and I learned that there are these small things that you can't even see, and they influence your life, your health so much. So I thought this looks exciting.
We are having a very interesting and exciting conversation, but unfortunately, we need to take a very short break and then we'll continue this conversation. Don't go away, we'll take a very short break. We'll come back again. Welcome back to this episode of Eureka. We are having a very interesting conversation with our guest today, Sudhanshu Vati. Sir, we are very thankful. I mean, we are having a very interesting conversation about your upbringing. Now, maybe I would like to shift a bit. You did your microbiology. I think one of the pioneering person who got education in microbiology in post-graduation in those days. What did you do later? I mean, like what kind of area you went on for your PhD? What kind of work you did in your graduate?
So, during my master's program, I learned more about viruses, and for the first time I saw an electron microscope at the university. And of course, I couldn't see a
So the
virus.
university actually had a
Yes.
good electron microscope.
They had an electron microscope. I could see a bacteria, but I could never see a virus there. But I was very excited about viruses. And then I decided that I think I should do a PhD now.
Okay.
But I was very clear that I would do PhD in virology, and there was no formal PhD in virology in this country.
Okay.
So I applied for scholarships overseas, and I got a scholarship from Australian National University in Canberra to do PhD.
So you went to Australian National University, Canberra, for doing your PhD.
That's right.
With a scholarship.
That's right. And I got very fortunate to work with a doyen of microbiology whose name exists in the textbooks today, Professor Lynn Delgarno.
Okay.
He is known for identifying Child-Delgarno sequences that are so important for translation. So when I landed in his lab, he used to work on viruses, and I expressed my interest that I wanted to work on viruses. he accepted me as his student, and that is how I got into viruses. And ever since, I have just continued to work on viruses because they are just so fascinating.
Is it just because it was intriguing, or you felt there is something very important in virus?
So there were several reasons. One, that I was intrigued by the smallest organism that can cause disease. These were the simplest of the living being, but they
People
were
say
so-
that it is in between non-living and living because
That's right.
sometimes it can be
Yes,
like a non-living.
yes,
Sometimes
yes, yes. So when they are outside the cell, they are dead. They can't do any harm to you. But when they get inside the cell, they begin to replicate. They can cause pathology. They can cause disease. So that was very exciting. Then molecular biology was, easier in terms of the challenge that one faces, because these are simplest of the organisms. So I was interested in genetic engineering and viruses. So I thought viruses would be a good model system to work on. And then, of course, they were responsible for so many diseases. I also remember during my master's, there was this virus called Japanese encephalitis virus, and there were several outbreaks of this virus being reported in the newspapers. And all I could read was that these mosquitoes are spreading virus, and then kids are dying. And it used to create a very scary feeling in me that, you can't control these mosquitoes. If they are carrying virus, they can come and bite you and you're dead. So
you did nothing wrong.
That's right. I mean, you were not responsible for the mosquito which was killing you for no reason. That's right, yeah.
What was your eureka moment? One thing that your discovery, your work, that you cherished most.
Well, eureka moments are hard to find. Let me tell you, in most scientists' life, only very rarely you will find their eureka moment, and we all work very hard to get that eureka moment. When I got opportunity to work on this rotavirus vaccine, and after several years of work with a large team of people and experts from around the world, finally we were waiting for the results of the phase 3 trial, which were not known to us.
Okay.
So I remember all of us had gathered together, and these results were coded, and they were supposed to be opened that day. And we all were discussing whether the vaccine was going to work or vaccine was going to fail. So I think there was a reasonable belief among the team that vaccine was going to work. And I remember before opening the envelope, which knew where the results had been described by the committee which evaluated all the data that we submitted, there was a challenge in the room that, okay, you write down what percentage efficacy the vaccine is going to be.
Just a kind of a fun.
That's right, so for the fun. So people wrote anywhere between 50 to 90%. And I think I said 55%.
Okay. You were being cautious.
I was being cautious, and I was being cautious because there was another vaccine which had 53%.
Okay,
so I thought we'll do a little better than at least that vaccine. And when the envelope was opened, it was a little over 53%. So I was very close, but it was very exciting that vaccine had worked.
You used a word like vaccine. Of course, most of us know, but how does it work? Second, you used a word like clinical trial, phase 3. What does it mean? Third, you said something like rotavirus. What's it? I mean, if you can explain to our audience, we'll be very glad.
So rotavirus is a very common virus in this country, which is spread through contaminated drinking water.
Drinking water. It's basically something that is spread through water.
If you don't have clean drinking water, you're likely to encounter rotavirus. And kids,
When you encounter, what happens?
So these infants, they develop diarrhea.
Diarrhea. Okay.
And in case of severe gastroenteritis or diarrhea, they need to be admitted to hospital because they continue to vomit, and it is very difficult to treat them.
And maybe in a very small percentage of cases, it may even lead to fatalities.
Very high percentage.
Very high percentage.
Every year, India, we lose almost 100,000 kids.
100,000 kids because of this virus.
Because of this viral diarrhea. So it's very high.
Very high.
And this is a vaccine preventable disease. So if you had a good vaccine, you could prevent it, or you can at least bring down the numbers or complications.
Substantially.
Substantially, very substantially.
So we can save lives.
So we can save lives.
So this is a rotavirus.
So this is rotavirus. So vaccine was made, in collaboration with a large team of people from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Society for Applied Studies in New Delhi, And there were also people from NIH USA and CDC and Stanford University, and Bharat Biotech was the company that produced this vaccine. And we were doing all the.
So, what does this vaccine mean? I mean, like, what does, I mean, in a very simple way, I mean, how does
So, this is a virus that was isolated from kids which were admitted to hospital in All India Institute of Medical Sciences.
Okay.
And it was established that we could convert that into a vaccine by growing up in tissue cultured cells. But we still needed to demonstrate that it would be safe and it would be effective. So it has to go through several stages of clinical development. Any vaccine or any biological, before it is allowed to be used in human, it has to go through several phases of development. First is the preclinical development, when you test its safety and efficacy in animal models of the disease. Then you are allowed, based on the safety data, you are allowed a small trial which is called phase 1 trial, which is a safety trial in a small number of humans.
Small number of people.
Yeah, and in this case, because the vaccine was meant for infants, so you're not allowed to work on infants directly. You start from adults, then you come to young children, and then you are allowed to test it in infants. So if it is found safe in a small number of people, then you are allowed phase 2 trial on a larger number of individuals, where you can do safety. You still have to establish the safety. But you can also test little bit of in terms of its immunogenicity. You are allowed to test more than one dose of the vaccine to see what would be the most appropriate dose of the vaccine.
Okay. You find what kind of dosage you need to
That's
give for it to make it efficacious.
So once you have established that it is still safe in larger number of individuals, you have been able to predict a dose that is likely to work. With all that data, you are allowed to conduct phase 3 trial, which is in larger number of kids. It is conducted in more than one center, so across the country in several places, in larger number of individuals, and there you establish the safety, you also establish the efficacy. So it has to be not only safe, it has to be effective.
So basically, any research is not just sent to society. I mean, it is first tested, carefully ensured that it's not going to have any very serious side effects, and then only put into public domain, right? That's what,
Absolutely. I mean, it's time consuming.
It's an interesting point, and I'm sure my audience would also be understanding some of these basic principles, which is very exciting. And I'm really glad that we are having this interview with you, who are part of the team, which is saving lives in this country of young children. But unfortunately, we need to take a small break. After the break, we'll continue. We'll take a small break. Don't go away. We'll continue this conversation. Translational Health Sciences and Technology Institute, Faridabad. The director, Sudhanshu Varki. Sir, thank you for being in this program. This word translational seems to be very strange. Translation we have all heard, I mean translating from one language to another, right? So what do you do here? What does this translational mean? How does it become a name for an institute?
Well, this is interesting indeed. Some 7-8 years ago, translation in biological sciences became a buzzword.
Okay. What does it mean in biology?
So we have a lot of knowledge that has been created in biology or medicine or engineering, but a lot of it goes only in publications as academic information, as knowledge, and has never seen the light of day in terms of any useful products or processes coming out. And that is because the scientists who do that kind of fundamental research, they neither have the infrastructure nor understanding how to develop that knowledge that they have created into products.
Okay.
So you need a specialized infrastructure, you need a different kind of people who can convert that knowledge into products and processes that can be used to improve the quality of life.
Okay.
So this translation over here means converting knowledge into products useful for improving the quality of life.
How do we pool this knowledge and make it to some kind of a usable, application-oriented research? Is what is your focus in this institute?
Yeah, so a lot of knowledge is available, let's say in basic biology, the cell biology, molecular biology, medicine, engineering, But if you put all of this together, you can come up with useful products. So, for example, if I know that there is an antibody that I have created against a virus, and I know that antibody is unique to virus. So, it is very useful from academic point of view. I can study the quality of antibody, characterize the antibody, features of antibody I can describe, and I can publish perhaps a good science paper.
Okay.
But if somebody has bent of application in their mind, they would think, can I make use of this antibody for treating infection against this virus? Can I make use of this antibody to identify this virus? Can I make antibody to diagnose infection with this virus? And that is when somebody who has understanding of biology, somebody who has understanding of medicine, somebody who has understanding of engineering, if a team is put together to make use of that knowledge about that antibody and that pathogen, can we then develop a novel diagnostics? Well, doing basic research is exciting and absolutely necessary. There is no denying of that fact.
That's like the foundation.
That's the foundation. But there are a lot of diseases or lot of problems that are unique to this country, and we need to find solution to those problems ourselves. Nobody else is going to do them for us. So how do we do this? We have knowledge, but we need to find the solutions. So we need to apply that knowledge to find solutions, and that is what we are trying to do in this institute.
I was told, for example, that even HIV virus, it's not same type of virus all over the world. There are some unique strain which is dominant in India. So which means if we have to find some cure for HIV virus in India, we need a very specific. That's what you are.
So this is a very good example that you just cited. Indian virus HIV is a different subtype than the virus which is prevalent in Europe and USA. So even if a vaccine is discovered in USA or in Europe,
we cannot just apply.
We cannot simply apply that vaccine over here. So it is better that we work with Indian subtype of virus and try to create our own constructs which are likely to be converted into vaccine.
What do you think about undergraduate education today?
Currently, there is dwindling interest in science education in this country.
Dwindling interest in science education?
Yeah, there is very little attraction for among the young students to go into science stream. They would like to go into engineering, they would like to go into commerce and management. And I am told that there are many schools which are shutting down the biology sections. So there is very
Schools
little.
Are shutting down the
yes, yes. Even in Faridabad, somebody was telling me that they have shut down the biology section because there were very few students.
So in the 12th standard, 11th, 12th standard, they are keeping only the maths option.
They are only keeping the maths option because there are not enough takers for biology.
Why? What is the reason like?
I think when I talk to these teachers, they tell me that the perception is that with biology you can go into medicine, which is time-taking, which is expensive, and return of investment therefore is not commensurate with what you get in engineering or commerce. So in general there is loss of interest in biology.
So basically you say that the push for professionalization, looking at only as professional education as the only higher education option, is causing deep problem for our Indian science.
That's right. They don't seem to understand the another possibility after doing biology of getting into the research. So that is something that we need to.
We need to also keep in mind.
That's
there
right.
is a huge potential and possibility.
There is huge potential for research.
If I ask you, what will be your message for the young India? What will be your message?
From the science perspective, I would tell them that science is not only exciting, but it can be paying as well. In science, when you go into product development, for example, let's just talk about the biological science. You work with an industry, you develop technologies, you transfer those technologies, and that gives you ample opportunity to generate revenue also. So science can be satisfying both at the intellectual level as well as can be a financially rewarding option for career development. So don't think that science is a very boring subject and is not a paying subject. I would say it's exciting subject and it can be paying subject. Also, if you put your brains in the right direction.
Right direction. Thank you. That's a very important point, I suppose, in this juncture in this country where we need to increase the number of personnel in S&T per million population. I mean, we are very low in the international scenario. We need to increase that if we have to become a progressing nation, if you have to enter the 21st century with confidence and holding our head high. Thank you for being in the show, and we thank you for your time.